It all started as a harmless exploration of an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. My friends and I were always on the lookout for new and exciting adventures, and this decrepit old structure seemed like the perfect place to satisfy our thrill-seeking desires. As we made our way through the crumbling halls, we stumbled upon a hidden door that led to a dark and musty stairway. Without hesitation, we descended into the unknown depths of the building. But as we reached the bottom of the stairs, we realized that we had made a grave mistake. We were trapped in an underground chamber, and the only way out was a heavy iron gate that was locked tight. Panic set in as we searched for a way to escape, but it quickly turned to terror as we heard strange noises coming from the shadows. We soon realized that we were not alone in this chamber. As the shadows began to take shape, we could see that they were not human. They were something far more sinister, something truly evil. We were at their mercy, and we knew that there was no escape. We huddled together in fear as the creatures approached, their twisted and deformed bodies looming over us. We could feel their hot breath on our skin, and we knew that this was the end. But just as we were about to be consumed by the darkness, a glimmer of hope appeared. We heard the sound of rescue crews breaking down the gate. We thought we were saved, but as the gate was open and the rescue team came in, we saw that the creatures had taken human shape and blended with the rescue team. They smiled at us and whispered, "You should have never come here, you belong to us now." We were trapped in an eternal nightmare and at the mercy of something truly evil. We were dragged deeper into the chamber, our screams echoing off the cold stone walls. We could see no end to the twisting passages and labyrinthine tunnels that stretched out before us. We were lost in a nightmare, and there was no waking up. The creatures led us to a room where we saw rows and rows of human bones and remains. We knew then that we were not the first to fall victim to this evil. We were just the latest in a long line of unsuspecting souls to be trapped in this underground chamber. As the creatures closed in on us, we could see the hunger in their eyes. We knew that we were about to become a part of the macabre collection in this chamber. We fought with all our might, but it was futile. The creatures were too strong, and our efforts were in vain. We were dragged to the ground, and the creatures began to feast. As we lay there, bleeding and broken, we could hear the creatures whispering in our ears. They told us that we would never leave this chamber, that we would be trapped here for eternity. And as the darkness closed in, we knew that they were right. We were doomed to spend the rest of our days in this underground chamber, at the mercy of something truly evil. But just as we were about to lose all hope, one of my friends remembered a small pocket knife that they had brought along with them. With a last burst of strength, they managed to break free from the creatures and stabbed one of them. The creatures let out a blood-curdling scream, and in that moment, the rest of them retreated, leaving us alone in the chamber. But our relief was short-lived as we quickly realized that the creatures were not the only thing that lurked in the chamber. As we stumbled through the dark, twisting tunnels, we could feel something else watching us. Something far more ancient and powerful than the creatures. We knew that we had to get out of the chamber before it was too late. We retraced our steps, our hearts pounding with fear and desperation. We could feel the presence of the ancient evil closing in on us, but we kept moving forward. As we reached the iron gate, we could see the light of day shining through the cracks. We pushed it open and stumbled out into the fresh air. We thought we had made it out alive, but it was only the beginning of our horror. As we looked around, we realized that we were not in the same place where we entered the underground chamber. We were in a completely different location and time. It was night, and the stars were shining above us. We were in a place that looked like an ancient ruin, and the air was filled with the smell of death and decay. We were confused and terrified. We didn't understand what had happened to us. We tried to retrace our steps, to find any familiar landmarks, but it was hopeless. We were lost in a nightmare, and there was no waking up. As we were wandering, we heard a noise coming from the distance. It sounded like a howling of a wild animal, but it was not a normal animal. It was something far more terrifying. As we turned around, we saw a pack of creatures emerging from the shadows. They looked like the ones that had trapped us in the underground chamber, but these were much more evolved, much more powerful. We knew that we were in deep trouble. These creatures were hunting us, and we didn't stand a chance. We ran as fast as we could, but we knew that it was only a matter of time before they caught us. As we reached a cliff, we knew that we had reached the end of our journey. We stood there, looking at the endless abyss below, knowing that it was our only escape. As we closed our eyes and prepared to jump, we heard the creatures getting closer, their howling getting louder. We opened our eyes and saw the creatures standing right in front of us, with a twisted and deformed grin on their faces. They whispered, "Welcome to your eternal nightmare, you will never leave this place." We screamed and jumped into the abyss, hoping that it would be the end of our suffering, but as we fell, we could still hear the creatures' laughter echoing in our ears. It had been a long time since I had been back to my hometown. Life had taken me on a journey far away from the small, isolated community nestled in the middle of the forest. But something had called me back, a sense of unease that I couldn't shake. I didn't know what it was, but I knew that I needed to return and confront whatever it was that had been gnawing at the back of my mind. As I drove through the winding roads that led to my childhood home, memories flooded back to me. Memories of long summer days spent exploring the woods, and the feeling of safety and security that came with the familiarity of the small town. But as I reached the outskirts of the town and saw the old abandoned house next door to my childhood home, a sense of dread washed over me. I had always been told to stay away from the old house, that it was cursed and that something sinister lurked within its walls. But I had never believed it, and as a child, I had often snuck up to the house to peer through the boarded-up windows. But now, as I stood in front of it once again, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Shaking off the feeling, I made my way to my childhood home. As I opened the door and stepped inside, I felt a wave of nostalgia wash over me. But that feeling was short-lived as I soon realized that something was off. I could hear scratching coming from outside, like something was trying to claw its way inside. I tried to brush it off and tell myself that it was just an animal or the wind, but the scratching persisted, growing louder and more frantic each time. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was trying to get in, something that was not natural, something that was not of this world. I tried to ignore it and go about my business, but the scratching continued throughout the night, keeping me awake and on edge. I couldn't take it anymore and decided to investigate. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, but as soon as I opened the door, the scratching stopped. I searched the area around my house, but found nothing out of the ordinary. I was about to give up and go back inside when I heard a faint scratching coming from the old abandoned house next door. My heart began to race as I approached the house, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I peered through a boarded-up window, and I saw something that I couldn't explain, a pair of glowing red eyes staring back at me. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was evil. I ran back to my house, and I locked the doors and windows, but the scratching continued. It was like whatever was outside knew where I was and was trying to get in. I couldn't take it anymore, and I decided to leave my house and never come back. But I know that whatever was scratching at my window will always be there, waiting for me to come back. And I know that it will always be watching me, no matter where I go. I spent the next few days in a state of constant fear, always looking over my shoulder and jumping at every sound. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, always just out of sight. I knew I had to do something before it was too late. I remembered that there was an old legend about the abandoned house, passed down through generations, about a family who had lived there long ago. They were said to have been cursed by a powerful witch, who had put a spell on the house, trapping them inside forever. The legend said that anyone who entered the house would be doomed to suffer the same fate as the family, trapped inside for eternity. I had never believed in the legend, but now I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something to it. I knew I had to find out the truth, no matter how terrifying it may be. I made my way back to the abandoned house, this time with a sense of purpose. As I approached the house, the scratching started again, louder and more frantic than ever before. I pushed open the door, and the scratching stopped. Inside, the house was dark and musty, the air thick with the stench of decay. I could feel something watching me, and I knew that I was not alone. I made my way through the house, my flashlight shaking in my hand. I could hear something shuffling in the darkness, and I knew that I had to be careful. I crept through the house, my heart pounding in my chest, until I finally came to a door at the end of a long hallway. I opened the door and stepped inside. The room was empty except for a large wooden chest in the center. I approached the chest, and as I reached out to open it, a hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. I screamed and tried to pull away, but the hand was too strong. It pulled me closer, and I saw that it was not a hand at all, but a claw, twisted and gnarled, covered in a thick layer of dirt and grime. I knew then that I was in the presence of something truly evil, something that had been trapped in the house for centuries. I pulled away and ran for the door, but the creature was too fast. It caught up to me and slammed the door shut, trapping me inside. I could hear it shuffling closer, its claws scraping against the floor. I knew that I had to think fast, or I would be trapped in the house forever. I remembered the legend and realized that the only way to break the curse was to destroy the chest. I grabbed a piece of broken wood and smashed the chest open. Inside, I found a small, intricately carved box. I knew that this was the source of the curse and I had to destroy it. I lifted the box and smashed it against the ground. The box shattered, and a bright light filled the room. I heard the creature scream, and then all was quiet. When the light dissipated, I opened the door and stepped outside. The scratching had stopped, and the house was quiet. I knew that the curse had been broken, and I had escaped the house alive. I walked away from the abandoned house, my heart still pounding in my chest. I knew that I had faced my fears and overcome something truly terrifying. But as I walked away from the house, I realized that the feeling of being watched had not left me. It was as if something was still there, following me, waiting for me to turn my back. I quickened my pace, my mind racing with thoughts of what could be waiting for me in the darkness. As I reached my car, I could hear the scratching once again, coming from behind me. I turned around, but saw nothing there. I got in my car and quickly drove away, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. I could see the red eyes of the creature in my mind, glowing with malice and hunger. I knew that whatever was in that house, it was not gone, it was not destroyed. It was still out there, waiting for me. I knew that I would never truly be free of it, that it would always be a part of me. It would be waiting for me in my dreams, in the darkness, and in the quiet moments when my guard was down. And I knew that I would never be able to shake the feeling of being watched, the feeling of being hunted. It was a part of me now, and it would always be there, waiting for me to let my guard down, waiting for me to come back to the house and be trapped for eternity. It was a small, porcelain doll, no more than a foot tall, with rosy cheeks and a dress of delicate lace. My wife had found it at a garage sale, and she couldn't resist its innocent charm. She brought it home and placed it on the mantelpiece in our living room, where it sat, seemingly harmless. But I knew from the moment I saw it, there was something off about that doll. At first, it was just small things. The doll seemed to move on its own, its eyes following me as I walked by. I dismissed it as my imagination, but the feeling of being watched never went away. Then, strange things started happening in the house. Objects would be moved, doors would open and close on their own. And always, when I turned around, the doll was there, staring at me with its unblinking eyes. My wife laughed it off as coincidence, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that settled in my stomach. I knew the doll was to blame, but I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It was as if it had a hold on me, drawing me in with its eerie gaze. It wasn't until our daughter was born that the true horror began. The doll seemed to take a particular interest in her, and strange things began happening around her. She would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming, as if something was trying to hurt her. We would find scratches on her skin and bruises on her arms, as if something had grabbed her in the night. We tried to get rid of the doll, but it always found its way back to us. It was as if it had a will of its own, determined to torment our family. We were trapped in a never-ending cycle of fear, with no escape from the malevolent spirit that possessed that innocent-looking porcelain doll. It's been years since that doll first came into our lives, and it still haunts my nightmares. I can't help but wonder what would have happened if my wife hadn't brought it home that day. But it's too late for regrets now. The doll has us in its grip, and I fear it will never let us go. As the days went by, the doll's presence became more and more oppressive. It seemed to be everywhere, always watching, always waiting. My wife and I were constantly on edge, never able to relax in our own home. We tried to keep our daughter away from it, but it was as if the doll had a magnetic pull, drawing her closer and closer. Our daughter's behavior began to change as well. She became withdrawn and quiet, her once bright eyes now dull and listless. She stopped playing with her toys and would spend hours sitting in front of the doll, staring at it in silence. We took her to see a therapist, but they couldn't find anything wrong with her. It was as if the doll had taken control of her mind. I knew we had to get rid of it, but every time I tried, something would stop me. I would wake up in the middle of the night with a feeling of dread, and find the doll back in its place on the mantelpiece. It was as if it was mocking me, taunting me with its presence. I became obsessed with destroying the doll, but it always seemed to be one step ahead of me. I tried burning it, drowning it, and even burying it in the backyard, but it always found its way back to us. It was like it was alive, with a will of its own. The final straw came when our daughter disappeared. We searched the house from top to bottom, but she was nowhere to be found. And then, I heard a faint giggling coming from the living room. I followed the sound to find our daughter sitting in front of the doll, her eyes glazed over and a smile on her face. I knew in that moment that the doll had taken her and I couldn't just sit there and watch. I grabbed a hammer and smashed the doll into pieces. At that moment, my daughter woke up from her trance and started to cry. She was safe, but the doll was not done with us yet. I could still feel its presence, looming over us, even though it was in pieces. We burned the doll and the ashes, but the feeling of being watched never went away. I could not shake off the feeling that the doll was still there, watching us, and it was only a matter of time before it would come back to claim us. It was then that I realized the doll wasn't just a possession, it was a curse. It had been passed on from family to family, and it seemed like it was never going to end. We sold the house, moved away, and never talked about the doll again. But I know, deep down, the doll is still out there, waiting for its next victim, and it's only a matter of time before it finds us. It was a typical Wednesday evening, and I was on my way home from work, just like any other day. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink as the sun set, casting long shadows on the quiet suburban street. I had been feeling a bit uneasy all day, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but the sensation persisted. I quickened my pace, my heart racing. I looked over my shoulder, but there was no one there. Still, the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down I knew it was something more sinister. As I turned the corner, I saw him. The mysterious figure. He was tall and thin, with a hood covering his face. He was standing in the shadows, watching me. I froze, unsure of what to do. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were made of stone. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears as my heart raced. The figure stepped out of the shadows and started to walk towards me. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced as I tried to think of a way out, but I was paralyzed by fear. I couldn't move. I just stood there staring at him as he came closer and closer. As he got closer, I could see that his hooded cloak was tattered and torn, and his boots were caked in mud. I could see the outline of his face, but it was obscured by the shadows. I could feel the sweat on my palms as my heart beat faster and faster. Suddenly, he stopped and looked at me. He reached up and pulled back his hood, revealing his face. It was just an old man, with a kind smile on his face. He asked me if I was okay, and I realized that I had been holding my breath. I let out a sigh of relief and apologized for being so jumpy. He just smiled and said, "No need to apologize, it's a scary world out there." I thanked him and continued on my way home, still feeling a bit uneasy. I couldn't shake the feeling that the figure had been following me, but I knew it was probably just my imagination. But still, I couldn't help but wonder, what if it wasn't? From that day on, I always made sure to look over my shoulder when walking home, just in case. As I walked the rest of the way home, my mind couldn't help but replay the encounter with the mysterious figure. I kept thinking about the way he had looked at me, and how he had stepped out of the shadows. Was he really just an old man, or was there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? I tried to shake off the feeling of unease as I walked up to my front door and unlocked it. I stepped inside and immediately went to the window to check if anyone was outside. But the street was empty, and there was no sign of the mysterious figure. I decided to put the encounter out of my mind and went about my usual evening routine. I made dinner, watched some TV, and went to bed. But as I lay in bed, trying to fall asleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the mysterious figure was still out there, stalking me. I tried to tell myself that it was just my imagination, that I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew that something was not right. I knew that the figure was not just a figment of my imagination, but something much more sinister. The next day, I couldn't focus at work. My mind kept drifting back to the mysterious figure and the feeling of being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, stalking me. I decided to talk to my friends and family about it, but they thought I was overreacting, that it was just my imagination. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was not right. I couldn't shake the feeling that the mysterious figure was still out there, waiting for me. I knew that I had to find out the truth, no matter how terrifying it may be. So, I started to investigate. I asked around the neighborhood, but no one had seen or heard anything about the figure. I even went to the police, but they didn't take me seriously. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I started to walk home from work earlier, taking different routes, always keeping an eye out for the figure. But despite my efforts, I never saw the mysterious figure again. I never found out who he was or what he wanted. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, stalking me. And so, I lived in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder, always wondering if the mysterious figure would return.